Vladimir Putin is banking on technology and new advanced Russian weapons to break the stalemate and deliver him the victory he wants in Ukraine. Is his advanced technology really unstoppable? And did he already put it to the test in Kursk? Plus, is this the reason he's bailing on negotiations, or was he never really all that serious? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this, I thought, is a photo that has been circulating around the internet, but what is so significant about it, this, to me, is the emblem of Russia's advanced tech, or at least their efforts to create an unjammable drone. This is fiber optic drones that were on the front line. This is actually reportedly taken in Kursk. Every one of these wires represents fiber optic cable. That is trailed behind a fiber optic drone. Now, what makes these drones so devastating on the battlefield is that they are effectively a drone just like the kind that have been used for 2 years in this conflict, right? A simple quadcopter drone with a munition mounted underneath it. But the key difference is that they don't talk to their handler via radio waves. They don't use electromagnetic signals, right? Or electronic frequencies. And what that means is that they are unable to be jammed because they communicate with their handler via a thin fiber optic wire, right? You might remember that the entirety of internet traffic between the US and Europe is relegated to just like a dozen fiber optic cables. So you can imagine that a much lower fidelity signal, namely video feed going in and maneuver commands going out, simply only require the thinnest of fiber optic cables. So what Russia has done is mounted those fiber optic cables to those drones. And the problem, of course, is that for the Ukrainians, their entire counter-drone strategy relies on jammers and electronically jamming that broadcasted signal between drone and controller. But now, with nothing to jam, the Ukrainians might not have a reliable countermeasure. And the number one thing that has countered these drones, let's see if we can find you guys a good picture of this, right? The number one thing that has stopped these drones from proliferating on the battlefield is, well, frankly, the cost, right? Here is a good example right here of a fiber optic drone, or at least a prototype of a fiber optic drone. Let's see if we can pull it up here. Oh, God bless it. Okay, so here's a couple of examples. Let's see. Here's an example of a Ukrainian version, right? There's a couple of different ones that are fielded for various uses, but this is a good example. You can see it's a quadcopter that spools out like a fishing line, right? If you've ever been fishing, you know that the fiber optic, right, the cable, it's not fiber optic, it's just regular fishing line, but it's about the same thickness, right? You can cast that out and that spool will just unfurl basically no matter where that thing goes. It only gets tangled when you try to reel it in. And so with these FPV drones, these kamikaze drones, they're never going to get brought back in. So it doesn't matter that it spools out. So literally in here is a spool not terribly different from your regular old fishing spool. And so the drone flies off, right, talks to its handler, and is unable to be countered. But this fiber optic cable, 10 kilometers of fiber optic cable, is very expensive. If a typical drone costs, let's say, around $500, right, a typical fiber optic drone costs around $5,000. Now, you may think, wow, how is this worthwhile at scale? Well, the problem, or rather the solution, is that a jammable drone has about a 8 in 10 attrition rate, right? 8 in 10 drones that the Russians and the Ukrainians deploy are getting jammed and rendered ineffective on the battlefield. Fiber optic drones, though, are almost inverted. For every 10 that deploy, 8 will strike their target, meaning that that don't do the math based on the cost per drone Do it on the cost to hit a target successfully. And in that metric, fiber optic drones are actually pretty competitive. But wait, there's more problems. You might recall that Vladimir Putin fired his previous Minister of Defense and replaced him with an economist. And an economist is going to understand one of the most important principles of free market economics, which is the economy of scale. And so while these fiber optic drones cost $5,000 in cable at first, the fact is that after months and months of production, the scale and the capability to cheaply produce fiber optic cable has gone through the roof. So it's likely that for the Russians, the cost per unit of fiber optic cable is actually extremely, extremely low, is likely coming down. And I can tell you, when I was in Ukraine in November, we already heard in Turretsk the Russians were piloting the fiber optic controlled drones. They were beginning to field test them and confirm that they really were effective on the battlefield. And you began to hear already from Ukrainian troops saying that their only countermeasure was actually a shotgun to literally shoot these fiber optic drones down as though they were skeet shooting. But if you've ever been skeet shooting, you know that really you can't be that effective unless you're within about 30 meters, and even that's pretty generous, 30 meters of your clay disc. So, boy, you do not want to have a life or death skeet shoot as your only defense against these kind of drones, right? You also have, of course, defenses like your armor, the armor of a vehicle or your body armor, but boy, those are not the things you want to rely on. And so the rumor, and I don't think it's a rumor based on, again, the accounts from Ukrainian troops and the footage and pictures like we've just seen, is that actually Russia, the first time they implemented this new fiber optic drone first strategy was actually in Kursk. You can see, let's take it back to the beginning of the month, just about 3 weeks ago. You could see right here, this is the Kursk incursion. And what's worth noting is that, again, the Ukrainians relied quite heavily on this highway here, the Suja highway. And you could see that, again, even in the contested region, these fiber optic drones, they have roughly a 10-kilometer range reportedly. And of course, the average FPV pilot sits about 3 kilometers from the FLOT, the forward line of troops. So if you're looking at this is maybe the last sort of safe region, the average Russian drone pilot's going to sit right about here, for example. And then you're going to push out. So you could see that those fiber optic drones were able to strike actually relatively deep into this key highway. But you see that as Russia scaled them up, watch as Russia is effectively able to choke off this key artery that provided Ukrainian forces with almost all of their logistics in almost all of these different fighting regions. And once it gets choked off, it's like a heart attack, right? When you have a heart attack, the damage is to your heart, but the blockage isn't in your heart. It's in an artery some distance away. And by blocking that artery, you damage the heart. So that's the best way to think of this kind of thing, where you damage the logistics, the ability to get bullets, medical supplies, food, water to troops. And you can see that as that cutoff began to happen, the rest of the organs, so to speak, began to atrophy. And you see now, right, as this began to collapse, the Ukrainians found there were more and more problems, right? You can see that here in Lebedivka, right? This is just a mere 7 kilometers. So now you can see once the Russians were able to position their FPV pilots within striking range of this key highway, right? You see that the further back on the highway they are able to cut off, right, the worse the damage gets. And this, I think, is a function of why the Ukrainian Kursk incursion collapsed as it did. And I think only here, when the Ukrainians are able to rely not just on this large highway, but on a number of other smaller kind of border crossings to enable logistics, I think that is where you're seeing, that's why this element here is at least sustaining a little bit longer. But I think for Russia, they're looking at this playbook and they're saying, guys, this is the future. This is our path to victory. And I think having done this, right, the Russians are likely saying, or at least Putin is saying, listen, we get to now double down. We are now winning. The Western alliance that has backed Ukraine has never been more fragmented. Our technology to launch offensive operations has never been more polished, and it's not clear that the Ukrainians will receive the assistance necessary to develop countermeasures, right? There are possible countermeasures to this, right? These kind of FPV drones could be countered, for example, by some kind of automated or radar-based system, some kind of audio system, right? Drones are quite loud and distinct. And so some kind of automated system could effectively, automatically shoot skeet and take out these drones. That's likely, with the technology that currently exists, that's probably the best bet, but it would be really hard to miniaturize. It would be really hard to get a sophisticated radar system that can handle that kind of thing. You also, of course, have additional problems of identifying friend from foe, making sure that they know, because again, without a radio signature, it's going to be very hard for individuals to identify, hey, that's one of ours leaving from one of our drone positions, whereas that other drone that sounds and looks identical is a Russian drone, right? You only know that through things like experience. So in the aggregate, right, Putin is almost certainly looking and saying, listen, this is my route to victory. And we see this, in fact, because Putin is ordering what they call Ukrainians without legal status to leave Russia. Now, this is sort of ridiculous, because you might recall you have to put on your Russian propaganda mask to understand this statement. When he says Russia, what he means, remember, the occupied regions have been annexed by Russia. So again, when it's convenient for Russia and Putin, they claim that, in fact, annexed Ukraine or occupied Ukraine is fully Russian. And many Ukrainian citizens, though, in those regions consider themselves occupied, Ukrainians living under occupation, right? And Russia is saying, listen, you have to either basically turn in your Ukrainian passport, get a Russian passport, and become Russian citizens, or leave. Now, you may ask yourself, how on earth are they going to leave, given the fact that the occupied regions are a literal fucking war zone? And that Russia views as not its problem, right? Now, it's highly possible, especially when you're talking about millions of people. Remember, there's the entire cities like Melitopol or Mariupol that are under occupation and have been for 3+ years. And so how are you going to clear out an entire city from these occupied regions? The answer is, of course, Putin's not stupid. He knows that these Ukrainians are going to have to leave. His goal is to create a refugee crisis, or more appropriately, burn their Ukrainian passports, making it very difficult for Ukraine in the event that the occupied territories are liberated or negotiated back to Ukraine. It's going to be very difficult for them to distinguish who is a Ukrainian citizen and who isn't, once they don't have a passport and they have only Russian identity documents. And so all of this, though, it's not an accident, right? It is to create either a refugee crisis, to legitimize the occupied territories, right? To create the legal fiction that these Russian occupied territories are actually truly a part of Russia and are only, only Ukrainian citizens live there. Again, you could see, for example, let's say there was a town in Canada just over the border in which 99.9% of the residents were American citizens, right? It would be much easier for both sides to say, listen, we think this town that's 99% American citizens, we think this town should be American. And even the average Canadian would go, well, you know, it is all Americans there. Like, they're all Americans. Do they really share Canadian values? Are they really Canadian? No, they're not. Why not send them back to where they come from? And so this is, again, a classic Putinist engineering scheme, social engineering scheme. And I think this is absolutely just a sign that Putin believes that he can win and will be fully annexing these occupied regions. You may also note that the decree ordered all, quote, foreign citizens and stateless persons residing in occupied parts of the occupied parts of the occupied territories, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, to undergo, quote, medical checks on drug use and infectious disease by June 10th. This is, again, a little bit of a hint, right? Again, imagine you are a French citizen living in France in 1942, and someone says to you, hey, the occupation government has decreed that you have to report for a medical check by this date for infectious disease. Would you say, man, something smells fishy here? Would you view it as intimidation? Even if literally all they did was a medical check, you would view it as an intimidation tactic, right? It also would be possible to sit there and go, hey, we're going to get your identity. We are going to give you a little document. We're going to verify your home address, your age. We're going to learn about you and your family, right? That alone is a threat, right? And this is standard Putin playbook stuff. Now, even though the American government, they're a mixed bag as far as their support for Ukraine. But polling data is clear. The vast majority of Americans still stand against Russia and stand with Ukraine. And so if you are one of those Americans, you could send a message, right? Through UAO, right? You know that I've worked with UAO for almost 2 years now. We've done a ton of fundraisers, and right now they have one of their anonymous donors in the Netherlands who has said, listen, I will match every dollar that the Americans donate, right? And the Europeans, don't kid yourselves. It's all the money in this fundraiser is going to get matched up to $250K. So if you donate $100, you're going to raise $200. It's a great deal. And it's going to go to a whole host of different units. But what's most interesting is that actually one is going to be the Artan team from the Ukrainian GUR. This is their military intelligence, one of their most top secret units, of course, providing some signed flags. But what I think is actually so sick is if you make a $250 donation, they will send you some of their patches, which is absolutely badass. I'm sorry. This is... For context, if you don't know, the GUR is the equivalent of like the Ukrainian CIA Special Activities Division. So that alone is worth it to be like, yeah, I was a supporter of these guys. And remember, it's going to go to a whole host of different guys. I actually met the GUR and their Artan team, and they are really, really bad dudes. Like, it was crazy just walking through their compound because it was just all of these... guys in like incredible shape, huge beards, none of them wearing military uniforms, all of them just, it was funny. It was like being at a CrossFit festival or something. Just everybody's in phenomenal shape. Everybody's walking around like regular dudes. But the difference is they're not just throwing up, squat cleans or whatever. They're smoking Russians. And they need our help. We're going to get them some of their high-end jammers, as well as some other valuable stuff, right? Probably some night vision devices. Again, they can't really disclose everything they're getting. So the link is in the description. Help them out. Also, of course, guys, you know that I value my independence more than almost anything. There's a reason I don't work for or collaborate with any government, not the U.S. government, not the Ukrainian government. I work direct with these units. I work direct with UAO, but at like a unit level. Like I don't do anything, any level of coordination beyond the brigade. And the reason I can do that and maintain my independence is because of you guys. You guys have my back and support me over on combatvetnews.com. And I try to give back, right? Every Tuesday and Thursday, we do uncensored combat footage analysis of the latest combat footage coming from the front lines. It's oftentimes sent to me by units who I met when in Ukraine. So it's often exclusive videos that we take a look at that gives us insight into what's happening on the front lines that we just can't get anywhere else and that YouTube would never let me show you. So if you're interested in the stuff that is too crazy for YouTube and you want to support me, go over to combatvetnews.com. The link is in the description. Of course, it's a Thursday, so we're getting a new combat footage drop and, of course, my Q&A for Lieutenant Tier and above. So check all that stuff out. It's absolutely one of the most important things. Okay. Now here's what I thought was interesting. According to an NBC poll, so, take it with a grain of salt, nearly half of American voters think President Trump favors Russia over Ukraine, right? And just 8% of respondents said they thought Trump was on Ukraine's side in the war, which is fascinating given that really something like 92% of voters probably identified that Biden was on Ukraine's side of the war. And this, I think, is just illustrative of just how hard the president has pivoted towards Russia and repeated Russian talking points, including things like calling Zelensky a dictator. That is a pure Russian talking point. To claiming that it's Ukraine who's actually not interested in peace, despite, again, Ukraine almost entirely fighting a defensive war and Russia continuing to advance and push into Ukrainian territory, right? Why would you need to seize so much territory in a defensive war? Right? So all of these Russian talking points, the American public actually not stupid. They correctly identify that Trump either is completely self-interested or, of course, interested in supporting Russia. In fact, and about 61% of voters said they personally back Ukraine in the conflict. And right, about a third of respondents said they thought Trump was actually neutral in the conflict, which the president himself has stressed. He said, quote, if I didn't align myself with both of them, both sides he means, you'd never have a deal. He said, I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America for the good of the world. FYI, guys, it is eminently clear that Russia views the United States as a zero-sum game. It believes that it cannot succeed and the United States succeed as well. That's one of the things that is a fundamental difference in the NATO alliance, the Western way of life. And don't get me wrong, the West has its flaws. The Western system, right? It seems to exacerbate wealth inequality. It does a bunch of other flawed things. But France, every NATO country, every country that has come into NATO and come into the EU has had massive increases in its economic state. It has grown immensely. The people that live there, by and large, are vastly wealthier. Their governments are more stable and more prosperous. The people are generally freer. They have more of a say in how their countries are governed. All of these things. In fact, there's only one NATO country in the Middle East, and it's Turkey. And you notice that it is also one of the most democratic, don't call them Arab, they're not, Turks are Turks, but one of the most democratic countries in the Middle East. And it's not an accident. It's not an accident. It's designed. It's the system functioning as designed. And so this idea that if you support America, you have to support Ukraine because a free, prosperous Ukraine is good for the United States, right? And Trump understands this, right? Why would he go and do this whole minerals deal thing, right? Because he knows that Ukraine has valuable economic potential, but Trump only thinks like a businessman. And a businessman in the United States, they operate quarter to quarter, right? They care about bumping the stock price this quarter. But a politician, the reason politicians exist in our society is so they can engage in longer term thinking, right? We say, listen, I have a job to do. I have to take care of my family. So I'm going to elect a thoughtful, intelligent person. I'm going to put them into these positions of authority like Congress and the presidential and the White House. And they are going to think long-term about the country, right? Now, obviously, politicians, they only think like 2 to 4 years ahead, 6 years if you're a senator. But still, relative to a business, that's long-term thinking. And so the politicians understand that there is no single business. There is no, they're not, quarter by quarter, right? Supporting Ukraine is an expensive prospect. Yeah, sure, it's old U.S. equipment. We weren't really using it anyway. It was just lying around. It was due to be replaced. All that's true. But if you zoom out and say, listen, other countries that have been brought into this fold, particularly ones where the cost of labor is low, where they have a young, productive workforce, how do they fare? And the answer is they become huge economic booms. They become massive trading partners. They produce tons of revenue. If you run the math over the next 20 years, Ukraine, if it follows a model of, say, like a Poland or a Latvia, they are likely going to pay for themselves in tax revenue generated through trade in the United States. They're going to pay for all the aid we've given them many times over. But of course, that requires a long-term vision of what it means to be America first, right? It's like this. It's like, most people understand this. It's like it's like living in an HOA, right? Your property is your property. Your neighbor's property is your neighbor's property. But everybody, they say, listen, we all want to live in a neighborhood where we don't have rusting cars up on cinder blocks on our front lawns. And so the HOA gets together and they say, listen, we're all going to agree that we can't tell you what to do, but everybody is better off. Everyone is better off without rusting hulks of old cars. So we just agree that that's going to be a rule, that we're all going to play within this. That is how international trade works. Everybody ends up better off when we all say, listen, we're all going to kind of have representative governments with, and a general commitment to human rights. We're generally not going to push our rivals out of windows and do all this other stuff. And the individual rules are going to be a little different everywhere, right? Some countries have more no words than the other countries. And that's okay, because there is a general sense of this is a better way to do things. This makes the whole neighborhood better, because when you have free people, they can engage in free enterprise. And when you have free enterprise, you get a really productive economy. And when, for example, Germany, one of I think the third largest economy in the world, when Germany does well, where do you think German stuff gets sold? It gets sold in the United States, right? Look in your neighborhood. How many people are driving BMWs? That's the German economy. Gave you guys BMWs you can afford. All of this is how the system works. And Russia, so when Trump says, I'm in favor of the United States of America, well, that were true, the United States of America needs to favor Ukraine, period. It's worth it. It's worth it just to get Ukraine, and it's doubly worth it to stick it to one of the America's enemies, because Vladimir Putin is an enemy of the United States. He has said so himself. That's not my opinion. That's his own statements. He's like, the United States and the West are our enemies. And I feel like I'm in crazy town that I have to make fucking YouTube videos being like, guys, FYI, Vladimir Putin's Russia is an enemy of the United States. He literally hates countries that have free expression and representative democracy because he doesn't, because he's a dictator. Anyway, there's one other story that I thought was it's so insane that I had to bring it up. In fact, it literally, I didn't believe it when I saw it. And I literally forgot about it until just now. According to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who, by the way, has a loose association with true facts, right? For example, she recently said that a judge's written order has legal authority, but a judge's verbal order doesn't. FYI, guys, do not try that in a traffic court setting. Do not try that when you're suing your neighbor for stealing your car and putting it up on cinder blocks in your yard or whatever. Don't try that. If the judge gives you a verbal order, you should listen to them. All right. So this is someone with a questionable relationship to the truth. But she says, it did not mean a deal for the U.S. to develop Ukraine's mineral resources was off the table, but she said, quote, the two sides moved beyond just the economic mineral deal framework and are looking at a lasting ceasefire. Now, here's the thing, guys. The U.S., we burned a lot of political capital for that. We looked like complete fucking idiots on the world stage because we had a shouting match with our ally. And we also scared every other country we provide security assistance to because every single one of them said, damn, right? South Korea looked and goes, damn, Ukraine got 3 years of military aid and they were forced to give up $500 billion of their minerals. The U.S. tried to send them a bill for what they promised was actually just assistance, was just a neighbor helping out a neighbor. And the South Koreans are like, damn, we've had 70 years of U.S. assistance, U.S. aid. And they go, damn, if we get sent a bill, we're fucked. And you started to see this already. You saw some of these countries like Canada, like Portugal, say, listen, I don't know if I want to accept any more U.S. military assistance, any more U.S. military help, all right, any more U.S. military gear. And obviously, U.S. defense contractors probably went to the White House and were like, abso-fucking-lutely not. You need to stop this shit. But also, like, we dealt, like, you can't unring that bell, right? It's like, I'm trying to think of it. It's like the old joke, right? You know? You could live your whole life as an upstanding citizen, but you kick one puppy and you're always going to be the guy who kicked the puppy, right? And so the problem is when the U.S. absolutely shits on its allies, absolutely humiliates itself, absolutely coerces them into a colonial-style resource extraction deal, the damage is done. You did all the bad stuff of the mineral deal. You dealt with all the negative consequences, and then you backed off of it? Like, good, but maybe, hear me out, you could have backed off of it fucking 3 months ago. I just never embarked on it. Like, honestly, guys, honestly. Now, again, like, Caroline Levitt just says shit, and it's almost not worth it to try to discern real reality. But it would still be pretty fucking insane for her to say, yeah, we did all the damage to our relationships. That all happened, right? Like, we kicked that puppy. But now, well, I don't know what you'd get out of kicking a puppy. We deleted the video. We didn't even post it online for clicks. I don't know. Is that why you'd kick a puppy? I can't think of a reason, right? So, yeah, well, welcome to fucking clown world. I don't know. Thanks to you guys, though. I'm going to keep you informed. And to the extent there's information, to the extent we can discern anything about our reality. Thanks to Bill Collier, Robin Coburn, guys, Martin, Gina Questa, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Caras, L90, Petratoro, and Jalen Gao. Couldn't do it without you guys. See you over on Combat Vet News here in just a few minutes. Thanks. See ya.